Trying to check. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I have a talk prepared for you today, and I'm going to read from the talk because I have 20 minutes and I don't want us to overrun. So yes, I'll get cracking then. And actually, Silanata alluded to a couple of things in his introduction, actually, which I mentioned in my talk. So anyway, it's Buddha Day, and this is a Buddha Day talk. So actually, when it was initially suggested, do we want to give talks, I was very resistant to it. No, I don't want to give a talk. Don't want to talk on Zoom. I don't like giving talks on Zoom at all. The idea fills me with some amount of horror. So anyway, so my initial response was reluctance. But then I looked at my response and my hesitation. I soon changed my mind. It's Buddha Day. Why would I not want to give a talk? To celebrate his life and attainment. I felt so much gratitude for the gift he's given me, and actually to us all as well. So my aim in this talk is to be as simple as possible in it. And I hope to show how the Buddha's teachings are as relevant today as they ever were, and perhaps even more so in the world as it is today. The challenges of life faced by those that have lived in the centuries that have passed since the Buddha's time continue to press ever more heavily upon us today. The nature of samsara has not changed. There is still the oppression of greed, hatred, and delusion. So first of all, I wish to give a very simple basic introduction to Buddhism in order to set the scene. First of all, what is Buddhism? Well, the word Buddha means the enlightened or the awake, and it all springs from the Buddha's enlightenment, his experience. What is enlightenment? Well, it's very hard to describe this in words, especially from the perspective of being unenlightened. So Sangharakshita, the founder of our order, has said one way to put it is that the Buddha saw the true nature of existence. Not that he simply had an idea, not that he worked out the true nature of existence in his head intellectually. He saw the way things really are directly. And this direct seeing transformed his whole being in its depths and in its heights. And this is the mystery. What is the true nature of existence? How does one realize this in the whole of one's being, in its depths and in its heights? And this is the noble quest of the spiritual aspirant. So now I want to go right back to the beginning so we can get a sense of this noble quest and what it is, back to the Buddha. So the Buddha was born over 2,500 years ago near the present-day border of India and Nepal. He came from a privileged family and led a life of comfort and ease. But he was not satisfied with his life and left his home in search of spiritual fulfillment. And this unhappiness is usually attributed to him having witnessed old age, sickness, and death, and wanting to find out why this was an essential part of this world, that there must be a reason why this is so. So he saw suffering and himself experienced suffering and discontent. He wanted to find answers to this dilemma and release from this. So off he goes, leaving the safety and comfort of his family, finding teachers to help him with his existential dilemma. He learns all he can from them, eventually surpassing their teachings. He gathers a few disciples of his own, and together they continue to seek answers and resolution, but this does not result in success. So anyway, the stories passed down through the centuries relate how he goes off on his own and one day sits under a tree to meditate, vowing not to move from that spot until he finds that which he seeks. So going deep into meditation, finally, he is successful. He attains what he sought. He is now a Buddha, an enlightened one. So first of all, I would like us all to understand that he is not a god. In Buddhism, there is no supreme creator of all that is, no controlling being. He was an ordinary human being as we are. We can all attain what he attained. The story of his spiritual quest still echoes down the centuries and connects us with what it is to be human. But he did see how hard it would be to communicate his experience. He saw how humanity relies on attachment and delights in this world. How could beings who cling to objects in this world be able to dwell with ease in full awareness of conditionality. Well, what is this conditionality? It is a fundamental insight of the Buddhas, and this is that any phenomena whatsoever, whether mental or material, arises in dependence on or is conditioned by a complex of other phenomena. And suffering lies in objectifying this ever-changing flow of phenomena, leading to attachment to these objects that we create. Well, on his enlightenment, the Buddha was no longer attached to any objects of this world. His experience was now of the unconditioned. He was no longer bound by delusive views as to the nature of this world. He was free, unbound, and dwelling with full awareness within the true nature of reality. He no longer experienced craving or hatred. Well, this is still quite difficult and challenging for us to understand. And thankfully, I mean, he did doubt whether he could actually convey this to people. But thankfully, because of his compassion for suffering humanity, he did decide that he could teach others so that they could attain what he'd attained. He sought out those disciples he'd previously been practicing with, and they again became his disciples, but this time benefiting from his realization. He spent the rest of his life, 45 years, teaching, so we have today a great heritage, a great lineage of living practice. Sangharakshita, as our founder, has described Buddhism as essentially the sum total of the different ways in which the Buddha and his disciples after him tried to communicate some hint, some suggestion of the experience of enlightenment to others, so that they too might eventually come to have that experience. And this is the Dharma, the teachings. It is often described as a finger pointing to the moon. I find this image very, very helpful. The teachings and the practices are the finger showing the way. And it's we as practitioners, individuals, have to find our own way on that journey in the company of others, our spiritual companions, treading the same path. So the teachings, as I previously said, can be very hard to communicate. It is, as I said, much more than intellectual understanding. It is a fully lived experience, developed through listening and today through much of reading as well, deeply reflecting and through meditation, and also through long practice of trying to live by the ethical precepts as best as one can, gradually refining these in growing awareness. It is important to test the teachings within your own experience. There is no requirement to believe because someone tells you to or because it is written in a holy book. Well, as I'm sure you know, one of the earliest teachings was that of the Four Noble Truths. And this is as true today as it was in the days when the Buddha attained his enlightenment. And this teaching, I wish to emphasize, reflects in a beautiful way the Buddha's desire to help us. He has often been referred to as the great physician. And this teaching follows an age-old method used by doctors. And this is, you identify the illness, you identify the cause, you identify the treatment, and then you initiate treatment. So first we have the truth of unsatisfactoriness or suffering, which we call dukkha, or what was called dukkha in the Buddha's day. Second, there is the truth of the cause or arising of this suffering. Third, there is the truth of the cessation of this suffering. And fourth, there is the truth of the way to the cessation of this suffering. And this is the Buddha's path. He was once asked by a disciple who was in some confusion as to what exactly is the Dharma. And he replied that the Dharma is whatever conduces to peace of mind, purity, seclusion, fewness of desires, contentment, insight and wisdom, to an understanding of the transcendental. Whatever you find in your own experience conduces to these ends, you can take that as his teaching, his Dharma. So fundamentally, Buddhism is a means to an end, the end being liberation from samsara. He is the great physician who's showing me and all of us the way to liberation from samsara. So now I want to turn to my personal experience. So here I am, over 2,500 years ago after the Buddha, living the Dharma life in the company of so many others. So as Silanata said a few minutes ago, I was ordained into the Triratna Buddhist order 2 years ago on a 12-week retreat in the mountains of Spain, and I was ordained by Tuliamati. And this is the most significant event in my life. And that is I say that without hesitation of doubt. And I was given this name Bodhilehi. And there is great significance in being given a new name on ordination. It signifies spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. It is chosen by the person who ordains you, someone who you have a close connection with, someone who is more spiritually experienced. And the name will contain some quality that the person who ordains you has noticed in you. It's a seed, as it were. And this seed, if placed in the right conditions, will grow. Potentially at some future time, maybe many lifetimes in the future, this seed will come into full maturity, and that is what we call enlightenment. So my name means she who sips or licks at awakening, as if tasting a sweet medicinal liquid. I instantly connected very deeply with my name. It is a potent symbol for me, and it indicates that I am sick, but I have found the medicine that will make me well. So now I want to turn to what led me to seek out Buddhism, to become a Buddhist. Well, actually, it took me quite some time to recognize that I was unwell and to see that the cure lay with the Buddha's teachings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my journey, from a deeply discontented, unhappy person to how I am now, which is much happier, contented person who is in a profoundly different relationship with herself and the world. Now, I have no idea how long the prescribed treatment will need to be. That does not seem to matter to me quite so much. It is the journey which feels more important. And sometimes there are uncomfortable side effects from the treatment. Profound change of any sort is often initially uncomfortable. We and I can feel secure in familiar ways of being, even if they are harmful to myself or others, or to ourselves or others. And to risk changing can feel unsettling. However, the cure I found is worth any temporary discomfort. So it was suffering. It was this dukkha that brought me to the Buddhist center. I didn't really know this at the time. It was 2006. I was 55 years old, in profound discomfort with the world. And I did think that meditation would help to relieve me of some of this. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this suffering. The Buddha identified 7 aspects of suffering, and they are birth, old age, sickness, death, contact with what one dislikes, separation from what one likes, and not to get what one wants. Now, this may seem unduly pessimistic. Life is not always unpleasant. There is much that is pleasant in this world. And this is undoubtedly true, but the Buddhist view is that even the pleasant is concealed suffering. So there's Edward Conzer, who was an eminent Buddhist scholar, and he identified 4 aspects of concealed suffering. So first, one finds something pleasant that involves suffering for someone else. Second, one has a pleasant experience, but there is a level of anxiety because you are afraid of losing it. Third, something which is pleasant, but binds us to something that brings suffering. So, for example, a good case in point is the human body. And fourth, and this one I find deeply lovely, any experience of this realm of conditioned things cannot satisfy the deepest longings of the heart. Somewhere within us, there is an awareness of something that I can best describe as being not part of the world, but is at the same time part of our world. And we have many terms for this: the unconditioned, the transcendental, Buddha nature, shunyata, the void. All these terms hint at something very mysterious. Now, personally, I can recognize that I have suffered from all these aspects of suffering. However, as I said, prior to coming to the Buddhist center, I was not aware of this at all. I just knew I was unhappy, not why. So I was in a very deluded state. I had the expectation that this world, this realm, could somehow give me what I wanted. I had been looking for happiness in the fleeting, transient world rather than from spiritual development. In fact, I had become deaf to the call of what can truly satisfy. So that was which was alluded to in that fourth aspect of concealed suffering. And this is the deepest longings of the heart that cannot easily be given name to. So in order to shine a light on why this might be, I shall talk in a few moments of something about my early influences, specifically two fundamental forces in my early life that had a powerful effect on the adult I was to become. So first of all, I want to refer to many factors that can influence the formation of the self. So ones which came to my mind: family structure, gender, social class, ethnicity. There are so many samsaric forces bearing down on us. Society exerts many pressures on us to be a certain way. I'm sure we can all identify many more. And looking into the nature of the self is a major focus in Buddhist practice, and I would say even the major focus. So through the practices of meditation and study, either with others or on my own, and going on retreats, I began to see how I distort reality, how in search for security and safety in an unsafe world, I perceive life in terms of subject and object. In Buddhism, the mind is considered as the sixth sense, and my mind will choose to pay attention to what affirms my views or ignore certain aspects of the world that do not agree with my views on how it is. And we all do this, and it is a source of so much suffering. We are made up of views, and we cling and act on the basis of these, and these are often not helpful to ourselves or the world. There is much greed and hatred, grasping onto what we want, pushing away what we don't. Life will not mold itself to our requirements. So now to those two formative influences on my life, and these are family and religion. This is a very brief snapshot, but I hope it will convey some idea of how we try to shape reality according to our attachments. So in my family, there was a mother, father, 3 brothers, no other physical contact with a wider family circle at all. My father was a devout Catholic. My mother had no religious belief or practice. We lived in very poor circumstances in a small rural town. Well, my father did not behave well towards my mother, and this caused her great pain. I experienced family life as mainly consisting of silent suffering. It was hard to witness my mother's pain. For many years, I felt a lot of anger and hate towards my father. And because he was a devout Catholic, myself and my brothers also had to be of that faith. We all went to a Catholic primary school, and I also had to attend a convent for my secondary education. I do recall that from an early age, I did have a sense of wonder about life, that there was some mystery to be explored. But those conditions in my family and the teachings of Catholicism were not for me positive influences. They did not encourage my sense of wonder regarding the mystery of life. They did precisely the opposite to this, and they stifled it. I saw how power was concentrated in the hands of men. Men called the shots in the family and in religion. When I was a younger teenager, sort of 12 or 13, I came to the conclusion that the belief in a creator God made no sense, and in fact it felt very oppressive. He was a vengeful being, and there was no escape even after death. He was always watching over, in control. Anyway, I left home when I was 18 and never again went to a church service. I determined to have nothing more to do with religion. It was just another area of life in which men are in control. So I had objectified aspects of my world, religion and male dominance. I had reified them, made them into mind objects. My mind then tends to interpret the world from this perspective, and so informing actions of body, of speech and mind and body. Patterns of response become habitual. I see religion as yet another force of male oppression, with nothing to offer me but dukkha, suffering. Now going forward to 2006 to the present day, I go to learn to meditate, hoping to feel more peaceful and content with my life. I was not consciously looking for a spiritual path. In fact, I recall that consciously I was resistant to the teachings. I kept trying to find fault with them. What was hugely important was that those who taught me to meditate and about the Dharma were largely female. At last, here were women being able to practice a spiritual path equal to men, and there was no creator male God involved anywhere. Once my initial resistance dissolved, I realized here was what I had been missing my whole life. However, I have had to work with how I had reified in my mind religion and male dominance. I discovered that Buddhism is not the perfect place of equality, that samsara inhabits Buddhism as well. Nirvana and samsara coexist together in a way. They are not places, but ways of being. And it all depends on the level of spiritual development of those who practice and call themselves Buddhists. So I discovered that Buddhism, as other religions, has also been run largely by men and has a large history of inequality towards women's spiritual potential. It seems there is hardly any aspect of life this does not occur. It has been hard for women to find a space they could practice as Buddhists and let their stories be heard. In recent times, women are now writing about the lives of those early Dharma practitioners, but the records that survive are small in number. Fortunately, times have changed, and there are now many writings by women on Buddhism. I am so fortunate to have found an order which has equal ordination for men and women. This has enabled me to engage with the teachings and practices in an effective way. I would like to make it clear that men are similarly bound by the norms and expectations of their gender. As practicing Buddhists, we all have to look into the nature of ourselves and the views we hold and see if they lead to non-attachment. In reality, there is no thing, no object called religion. There are only individuals practicing together in relation to certain beliefs they hold in order to penetrate into the mystery of life and existence. We are all individuals on a path of practice and subject to greed, hatred, and delusion, and we work together to overcome these poisons, supporting each other and inspired by this vast lineage we are part of. The practice of ethics and meditation is so important. All of us unenlightened beings will act from these habitual patterns of behavior a lot of the time, and so there is potential to be what we call unskillful. But I would expect that if I do so, my spiritual friends will point this out in a kindly manner so that I can see what needs to change in order to act skillfully. So following the Buddha's path, this great physician, I am growing in awareness of what my mind is turning towards or away from. And I can begin the process of transformation of my being, to move away from delusion, greed, and hatred and towards wisdom, generosity, and love, to live in harmony with the true nature of reality and not fighting it. I am a much healthier human being. I have rediscovered my wonder of life in all its complexities. I have dived into its mysteries, and there are wonders there that cannot be explained, dissected, and held onto. It is a path with no end, and that is a wonder in itself. The Buddha taught that the spiritual life is to be lived for the welfare of all and for the liberation of all. And this requires that we take responsibility for ourselves, so we stop being part of the problem and become part of the solution. We live in very challenging times. We will be greatly tested. As a species, we have wreaked havoc on this world, and this has to change, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of this beautiful world we live in and all those wonderful creatures we share with. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening to this talk. And I am now at the end, and I've only gone 2 minutes over the time. I'm glad